Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Michael Riley here with the Hurricane Outlook into session for July 6th, 2020, recorded around 4:11 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll take a look here at the latest sea surface temperature last updated as of yesterday, July the 5th. We continue to notice this area of persistent cooling out here in the equatorial Pacific. This will contribute towards our La Nina for this upcoming season. Again, we are likely to head in towards at least a very weak La Nina by the time we get into fall and the winter of this upcoming year. Again, this area has been cooling off. It was warming up over the last week or so, but you notice now those anomalies are starting to cool off once again out here, really in the Nino 3.4 region, which is this area roughly in throughout here. And this area is continuing to cool. Again, as we get these easterly winds that are kind of blowing across here, this is causing upwelling in this part of the world over here, and that kind of translates around in the water currents all the way out here, and you kind of get this persistent area of cooling. In the meantime, in the Atlantic Basin, we continue to notice now there has been some cooler anomalies out here to the east of the Cabo Verde Islands, but right off of Africa here into the Cabo Verde Islands and then into the main development region and beyond, this area is fairly warm above the long-term average, about a half a degree to a degree Celsius on average above the long-term average. And we're continuing to notice this area persistent warming out here in the subtropical Atlantic, although it has started to weaken in intensity over the last several weeks or so. But again, we're not really seeing a basin-wide warmth kind of sneaking its way in through here. Instead, you're kind of seeing this more classical phase 1 AMO signature, that horseshoe shape AMO configuration pattern. Again, some of this cooling is just related to the Saharan air that's kind of come off and block some of the sunlight. The water does have a lag kind of period behind that Saharan air, so it does take some time, but that lag period is now kind of catching up, and this is probably the coolest it's going to get in the main development region. In fact, it's going to warm pretty significantly over the next several weeks, and we'll show that here in a minute. Upper ocean heat content, basically, this was updated this morning. Basically, you're taking a look at how deep does the 80-degree isotherm actually go, and an isotherm is a line of constant temperature. In this case, basically everywhere I'm highlighting has an area of significant upper ocean heat content, with your more significant areas delineated in the upper end of the distribution here, really the upper echelon, the upper third of it. Basically, these reds, greens, and oranges here are indicative of that very deep upper ocean heat content. We'll zoom in here. Again, if you get a tropical cyclone to move over this water, it is not going to upwell cooler water. Instead, it's going to upwell that warmer oceanic waters, and again, that is not going to allow for much in the way of anything to stop tropical cyclones from coming into that environment and really taking advantage, all else being equal. So this area in the atmosphere and in the thermodynamic environment is very favorable in the thermodynamic sense, and even out here in the Gulf Stream, in the Bahamas, very deep upper ocean heat content anomaly, or not anomalies, but deep upper ocean heat content values. And even out here in the main development region south of the Cabo Verde Islands, which is right over here, these values are, still they're on the lower end of the scale, but basically they do have enough to support a tropical cyclone to come and take advantage of that. So the environment is now shifting from an unfavorable base state into a more favorable base state, and we have a lot to talk about here going forward. Water temperatures in portions of the Western Atlantic Basin very warm out here. Now these are skin temperatures, so they're not necessarily representative of a very deep portion of the oceanic environment. However, obviously out here in the Bahamas, where those upper ocean heat content values were fairly decent, basically in the upper third of the scale, water temperatures on average running about 31 to 32 degrees Celsius, which is about 92.5 to about 94 Fahrenheit. So very warm water temperatures, and if tropical cyclone were to come take advantage of that, especially through here, look out below, because if you get something to take advantage of that, if you have a full-fledged hurricane coming along, this is basically like rocket fuel for that tropical cyclone. So I'm not trying to necessarily sound the alarm, but then again, if something comes along to take advantage of this, it's going to be of deep concern. So this has my attention, because if this sticks around into August and September, if we get any systems to come out here that are more robust and developed prior to reaching this kind of rocket fuel per se, lookout down below, all else being favorable. And even into the Gulf of Mexico, too. Water temperatures very warm. Bay of Campeche, very warm. Rest of the Gulf, very warm. And we talked about this, that, the Gulf of Mexico, it was a little bit cooler. By the way, these graphs are coming from tropicaltidbits.com. But these water temperatures were a little bit cooler out here across portions where Tropical Storm Cristobal kind of upwelled some of the water out in this region. But again, these water temperatures have now rebounded. The whole Western Atlantic Basin is fairly warm and is ready for something to come and take advantage of it in the thermodynamic sense. And even the Gulf Stream out here very warm as well. In the southeastern Pacific, where we probably will have our first Eastern Pacific hurricane of that season, is certainly looking more robust with water temperatures 29, 30 Celsius out there here as well. So very warm out across that region. Now, a couple things to take a note of. Tropical Storm Eduardo, which did form last night to the northeast of Bermuda, has now kind of been moved out. It is now moving northeast at 37 miles per hour. So this will be a good rule of thumb is when you have a tropical cyclone moving at basically what its maximum sustained winds are. In this case, sustained winds are at 45 miles per hour. Forward movement is at 37. This is quickly becoming extratropical and will no longer be of a tropical nature. You kind of do notice some of the westerlies already, or kind of more easterlies. But basically, you have these winds that are kind of just forcing this out to the north and east, and eventually we'll get caught up here north of the Azores and potentially impact Ireland as a cyclone there, but nothing tropical of nature for them. This was our very little impressive wave that we did have coming over the portions of the main development region. We'll get to that here in a minute. Ninvest 98L is situated right over here. We'll also kind of touch on that here. But first of all, this is our tropical wave that's kind of out through here. No chance really of significant development. You kind of notice how some of there's a little bit of kind of arcing in the atmosphere. You kind of notice that little arc cloud out through there. That is very indicative of that dry, stable air in the atmosphere. All these kind of cumulus clouds out here, and very indicative of that dry, stable air. This whole big area of Saharan air that's kind of present and present across there. And just kind of more of this dry, unfavorable base state is still plaguing the Atlantic Basin at this time right now, but this tropical wave is getting ready to impact Barbados, so much needed rain coming for portions of Barbados, hopefully. But again, if you get under any of these hot towers, basically any of these thunderstorms that do go up, you could see some gusty winds, certainly in any downbursts that occur with the drier air aloft. That's actually going to help promote downbursts in the atmosphere, so that is something to kind of keep in mind, that this could cause some locally gusty winds, maybe some severe winds across the area, as any thunderstorms that go up will kind of quickly die off in this environment. But strong upper level winds right now prevailing for this time of the year, really going to be preventing, as this wave is generally moving off towards the west-northwest here. These strong upper level winds are going to inhibit development, so no real chance of significant organization here over the next 24 to 48 hours before this finally becomes a Eastern Pacific basically ghost, or I'm sorry, Caribbean ghost, as this will eventually move into the Caribbean, and might actually, some remnant energy might actually make its way into the Eastern Pacific Basin as well. 98L is expected to kind of meander around the southeast for the next few days. Certainly a big rainmaker threat for portions of the southeastern United States, before finally 98L might eventually emerge out into the Gulf Stream across here and might have a chance to develop, but again, only a 40% chance over the next 5 days or so. The rest of the main developed region being plagued by this dry stable air mass, so no significant concerns, although we do have a very decent tropical wave coming off once again off of Africa, and you notice this turning right here, so we'll watch. This was also a tropical wave that we were talking about the last couple of days. And that came off of Africa and then eventually made its way over here, down here in the intertropical convergence zone. We're also kind of watching our little disturbance out here, 97E, which will likely become a tropical depression or storm by tonight. It is quickly organizing there in the Eastern Pacific Basin. 850 millibar vorticity, or the spin in the atmosphere, about 5,000 feet off the ground. As you kind of get into these reds and whites here, you're getting your more cyclonic spin with height. This is Tropical Storm Hernando out there moving off towards the north and east here, not really expected to be of any significant land concern. You can see this is kind of stretched out through a pretty dying front across that area, and then this is Invest 98L over here. This area of energy right here is Invest 97E, likely to become a storm by later tonight or so, and could become the Eastern Pacific's first, and I repeat, first hurricane in the Eastern Pacific Basin season, which actually began all the way back on May the 15th. So this is finally starting to kind of open the window for the Eastern Pacific Basin, but we've already had 5 named storms in the Atlantic Basin. And real quickly to kind of touch on this here, and we'll jump back to the visible satellite to really kind of get a better representation of this. All 5 named storms in the Atlantic Basin have formed from not necessarily tropical processes. Now, there was Cristobal that formed from a Central American gyre that spawned Amanda out here in the Eastern Pacific, and that remnant energy became Cristobal in the Bay of Campeche, and then eventually moved on into southern Louisiana and impacted this area with some heavy rainfall and storm surge. We have not yet seen a tropical wave go on to develop in the main development region so far. Now, that isn't to say that's not going to happen in the month of July. In fact, indications are that this will likely end up get going here very soon. But the main takeaway is that, we've seen comparisons to 2005. 2005 had a bunch of named storms, kind of the record-breaking E-storm, Emily, which became a Category 5 out here that ended up becoming this Category 5 in the Caribbean, formed from a tropical wave that came off of Africa, a very vigorous wave that kind of moved all the way through here and then eventually kind of hit land. And we're not seeing that. In fact, all 5 storms have formed from not necessarily non-tropical processes, but non-tropical waves that originated off of Africa. Bertha originated, some of its remnant energy was from a tropical wave, but, its actual genesis was not from a tropical wave at all. It was from, more baroclinic processes, and then, kind of became a very brief tropical cyclone. But we've seen comparisons to 2005, and once again, we're not really seeing that in the environment that this, the record-breaking E-storm in 05 was from this Cat 5 tropical wave that, this Category 5 hurricane that formed from a tropical wave coming off of Africa. So far, we've not seen that, but it is a sign, needless to say, that the favorable environment is setting up across the Western Atlantic and then eventually translating out here into the Caribbean and main development region, and that will certainly see an uptick here very soon. To kind of ramify that, this is the Eastern Pacific. 97E is located out here. 90% chance of the next 5 days, likely to become a storm by tonight. A couple of areas of disturbance out here, but no significant land concerns from the Mexican coastline or Central American coastline, the Gulf of California, or the Cabo San Lucas resort areas, or the Baja of California. No significant land impacts expected, as we will likely see a big ridge of high pressure kind of steering these storms away from land. No real troughiness this time of the year to really bring these far enough off to the north and kind of set these turning into the coastline. So no significant land concerns, but the Eastern Pacific, is getting busier as a convectively coupled Kelvin wave is expected to cross this area and then eventually out to the Atlantic and then set up the Atlantic favorability over the next few days. Now, as promised, we we're going to get into this on the 1st of July, but this is the 2020 Atlantic hurricane season predictions, my predictions alone. Again, we have tentatively raised our numbers even further to go 65% above average season, with a 20% chance of a hyperactive season, a 13% chance of a normal season, and a 2% chance of a below normal season. And we'll get into the reasoning why behind that in a minute. And for the actual numbers, I am forecasting 22 to 16 named storms, 10 to 7 hurricanes, and 6 to 3 major hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin. Now, for the reasoning behind that, this is basically the GFS, 1,000 millibar zonal wind anomalies. This is kind of lower in the atmosphere, but this is looking at roughly, this correlates to the main development region of the Atlantic, kind of this area through here. Right now, this is starting at July the 6th at 7 o'clock in the morning and ends here roughly about July 15th or so at 7 in the morning. And basically everywhere where you see these bluish anomalies, these are kind of your easterly winds. And everywhere where you see these reds here, that's your westerly winds. And in the Atlantic Basin, we are showing signs that we did come from a pretty significant easterly wind burst, kind of like you saw out here. This is correlating roughly to the Africa and the main development region through here. And what we're seeing is a very anomalous pattern for a very strong, persistent westerly wind anomaly pattern. Now, a westerly wind is going to help warm the Atlantic, and this is where we come back to our SST anomalies. This area in the Atlantic Basin is favored to warm over the next several weeks or so, and that is going to help induce a very significant warming trend, possibly significant warming trend, across the eastern main development region and into the central Atlantic Basin. This is likely to cause a very significant warming of the main development region. Not only that, but that also creates a very favorable cyclonic curvature in the atmosphere in the MDR. This will typically favor more chances for tropical cyclone genesis across that area, as we are entering now a more favorable background environment. These tropical waves coming off of Africa will have a more favorable environment, and as we said, wait till we get through about mid-June, early to mid-June, and then things will start kind of kicking from beyond there. And we're starting to see the signs that things are now going to be changing right around the corner. We're going to see the seedlings basically for a very busy Atlantic hurricane season. And to further that, this is coming off the European precipitation anomalies. The monthly ensemble mean for August, not even September, but August of 2020. Basically, the brown anomalies here are your, basically the browns are your drier anomalies, your not so moist air in the atmosphere, and basically your green and blue, this is your more favorable anomalies for precipitation. And in some cases out here in the main development region, over about 10 inches above the long-term average. But I want to point this out. Now, keep in mind, the European does have a dry bias, and you notice this area right here. This correlates to our basically our tropical wave axis eject region. And basically what happens is these tropical waves will come off through here. They're amplified in this environment, and they go on to be more favorable out here in the eastern Atlantic main development region. Now, the European with a dry bias, we've already seen the Sahel region of Africa and basically all of this area of Africa be well above the long-term average. In fact, we've seen basically Africa be, in some cases, just astronomically above the long-term average in sense of the precipitation anomalies out there here. And this is likely to be very wet compared to what the European ensembles are showing. And that is very concerning, considering the fact that the European has also gone basically with this more sort of this very wet anomaly for the main development region. That is very concerning, because as these tropical waves have to come off, they're going to encounter a more favorable environment, and a more favorable environment in the atmosphere gives more of a chance for these tropical waves to go on to develop and become something. And that is going to be something that we're really going to have to monitor. And to further that, this is coming from September on the European ensemble anomalies, or ensembles here, for the precipitation anomaly for September of 2020. And you notice, I mean, where is that carving a track? Right through here. Main development region into the Caribbean. Now, these necessarily don't represent the tracks of tropical cyclones, where they're going to go. The bottom line is that if the European ensembles are showing a more favorable pattern and a more wet pattern, wetter anomaly with the European dry bias that it has, this is concerning. This is a very concerning delineator for a very busy Atlantic hurricane season, main development region hurricane season. The Cabo Verde Islands are certainly the Cabo Verde, the Cape Verde hurricane season is going to begin sooner rather than later, and it's only a matter of time. You notice the overall kind of dry anomalies out here in the subtropics, very precipitation anomalies. For the European to be showing this is something to be taken note of. and something that should not be taken lightly. Again, we're not trying to hype anyone here. We're not trying to cause, any concern or any panic. But the bottom line is that a very active Atlantic hurricane season is expected, and we're seeing the signs of it. Tropical waves are already trying to go on to develop out here in the deep tropics. It's only a matter of time before things get rolling around here. And to kind of put this deeper into perspective, this is the European Ensemble 850 millibar zonal wind anomalies, basically at the 5,000 foot level. Again, this area roughly correlates to the Eastern Pacific and the Western Pacific out here, and this area correlates to the Atlantic Basin. And again, we're heading into a time where we're going to get more westerly winds. That's what these yellows and oranges represent, and the bluish and purplish is the easterly winds. Easterly winds cool the Atlantic, westerly winds warm the Atlantic, and we are likely to see a prolonged westerly wind event in the Atlantic Basin for now, basically from now all the way up until basically the foreseeable future. So this is going to have implications on the Atlantic Basin, and this is going to warm the Atlantic and kind of precondition the Atlantic Basin, if you will. And this is the velocity potential anomaly coming from the European ensembles again. Basically, this is for today. Velocity potential just off the charts out here in the Western Atlantic Basin and basically the whole North American area. These westerly, these velocity potentials are positive anomalies, or in this case, these are negative anomalies, but the bluish here in the bluish and purplish, these indicate your rising air in the atmosphere, while these oranges are actually the sinking air in the atmosphere. As we go on throughout time and we head into week 2, we continue to see this prolonged out. Really, this is from the 14th of July all the way until the 20th of July. So basically, mid to end of July, we are still seeing this very favorable pattern off of Africa. And, we might get this little area of kind of sinking anomalies to pass over. But again, that's kind of 3 weeks out. But the bottom line is that a more favorable Atlantic main development region can be expected, and we will likely see a 1 or 2 tropical waves try to get their genesis out here in the main development region of the Atlantic. Now, with all that being said, what is going on right now? This is what could be coming up for the foreseeable future. Well, this is the 12Z GFS forecast from tropicaltidbits.com. Valid as of 1 o'clock this afternoon, 18Z. And we continue to notice how, we get these little tropical waves. We're likely to see the Eastern Pacific Basin kind of light up, but no land concerns at all. You notice these tropical waves, and this is kind of pushing through hour 162, hour 180. The Atlantic Basin kind of remains quiet, but the overall warming trend is going to continue. And for the European, again, you notice how 98L is actually going to be positioned out right across here. And one of the big factors regarding what 98L is going to eventually do is this big ridge of high pressure that's kind of positioned out here. You kind of have these two little competing areas of high pressures, but basically the influence of these highs combined stretch all the way over there with our kind of area of lower pressures out here. And again, if you have this area of high pressure out here, you can't really get 98L to come fully out here and then eventually kind of curve back in. So this might stay closer to the coast, and in fact, the GFS forecast is kind of suggesting more of a thing where this kind of emerges but stays very, very, very close to the coastline out here. So it's going to be a matter of time before we kind of see what happens. But again, the GFS and the European are coming into very good consistency that 98L is in fact going to remain basically a rain threat. So don't downplay it, because it will be a rain threat for the area. But in terms of tropical development, it is looking a little bit less likely today than it did yesterday in the day prior. That 98L is actually going to try to get its origins out here in the Gulf Stream. So if anything, this might become a very brief weak system out here. But again, we're not seeing the signs of anything significantly major. Certainly no hurricane threat at that time. And then eventually after that, the Eastern Pacific still takes over. But again, the Atlantic Basin is going to wake up from its slumber very, very soon. So with all that being said, again, this is the time to prepare where we're still in a little bit of a slumber. We're, still kind of getting there. The interseasonal, favorability is going to pick up quite well over the next few weeks. And it's only a matter of time before something really comes along to take advantage of that environment. So with all that being said, it's time to prepare. Make sure you know where you're going to go in an evacuation case, in case you're prompted to evacuate. Have enough supplies to last you a week. Again, if you live in the islands, know where you're going to go, know how, safe your environment around you is. Take everything into consideration and make sure to, prepare, because it only takes one, and it doesn't necessarily take a category 5 like Michael or Dorian to ruin someone's life forever. It could only take something as simple as a tropical depression like Imelda to dump a ton of rainfall and cause a lot of property damage and loss of life. So we want you here. We want you to stay safe, and that's my goal. And that's helped, and I hope to motivate you guys to really take action and prepare now while you still have time. So with that being said, hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening. Of course, I will be here on Twitter. Links will be in the description for that. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and that really helps the channel out greatly and tremendously. And I'll see you guys tomorrow afternoon. Have a great afternoon and evening, and I'll see you guys back here tomorrow afternoon. Stay safe, everyone. Have a good day.